Very special thanks once again to Philip Raby Specialist Cars, located in Emsworth. Of course, as always, I've dropped a link to their webpage down in the video description, where you can check out their servicing options if you are already a Porsche owner, and of course check out their current for sale stock, beyond Porsches, even to recently on the channel, the gorgeous Mercedes E55 AMG that I reviewed as well. So if that's something that you're looking for and you're in that part of the UK, click down below and give them a look. There are a massive array of arguments that can be made as to why the Porsche 911 is the single greatest sports car of all time. Certainly one of the greatest, and a lot of those arguments tend to revolve around similar things. The sheer performance, the trackability, the build quality, even its motorsport tie-ins, or maybe just how long-legged the model has been. Those are all true, and that's exactly why that's not the thing that impresses me the most. In fact, the thing that I believe is the true key to the 911's success, and crucially always will be, now more than ever in fact, is actually a very personal reason. Because, although you might not think of this, it's very similar to the way I run my channel. And what I mean by that is, consider the traditional sports car buying experience. Even up until relatively recently, what were the choices that you had? Well, you pick out a sports car that you want from a manufacturer who you like, you test drive it, you like the car, you decide to buy it. Now we get to my crucial point. What are the choices that you have to make? Well, generally speaking, you pick a colour, sometimes pick an interior colour, and then as far as the car itself, well, what are the choices? Do you want a hard top or a soft top? Maybe a manual or an auto? That's not exactly a wide variety of options, and even as far as the sports car itself goes, there are relatively few different versions of it. Now these days, more so than ever, you have a myriad of options. But back in the day, that was not the case. You liked a sports car, you bought it, that was it. That is the crucial point that I love, because just like with this channel, wherein I do real cars, real motorcycles, video game content, unboxing model cars, product reviews, even automotive news, it appeals to not only more people, but crucially different types of people. And that is good business. Porsche and Corvette from Chevrolet have always done that, and I believe that is one of the single biggest keys to their success. Because no two buyers want the same thing, and if you can give them multiple options, cars which are based around the same platform but are totally different, 911 Turbo, 911 GT3, 911 Carrera, nowadays more than ever there's so much variation, well, you can appeal to not only more buyers, but as I said, different kinds of buyer. And that, I believe, is one of the best things about the 911. Now, this particular 911 is of course a 993 generation. And in fact, it's the same age as me. It comes from 1994. And I believe, for me personally, the 993 might be my favourite era of 911 as an overarching model, because there's just something about it which to me is a pivot point for the 911. It's right on the cusp between a full-on classic and a modern sports car. It has some of the advantages in terms of better Tiptronic gearboxes, better reliability and build quality, and of course the 911 already had that, but certainly more sports cars began to focus on that in the 90s and beyond, and this car is right on that border. It's new enough to have the benefit of those options and modern advantages, but it's still old enough to be an authentic classic and to have that old school, simplified, pure driving vibe. I love that about the 993, and in a funny kind of way, even though more and more time passes, it kind of stays that way for me. The 996 hasn't overtaken that in my opinion in that regard. The 993 just sits on that pivot point for me personally. Now my favourite version of various sub 911s changes all over the place. My favourite turbo, for instance, is the 997. Likewise, my favourite GT3 is from that generation as well. But the 993 is a fantastic generation to work with, and this particular model, which is a Carrera with the Tiptronic gearbox and rear-wheel drive in particular, offers a whole lot to love. And in particular, as I always like to say with my reviews, I really do think it depends on the type of buyer that you are, because within the 911 range, as I alluded to earlier on, there is so much choice to be had that there really is something for everyone. So what am I talking about? Where does the Carrera fall? How do others compare? Well, take for instance something like a Carrera. To me, the Carrera is a perfect mix of great performance, but also everyday usability. The ground clearance is fantastic. The size of the vehicle isn't over the top, it doesn't have wings sprouting and body kits all over the place and extended arches and everything like that, which is all well and good, but not exactly ideal in all UK road conditions. It's not full-on hardcore track day raw all the time like a GT2 would be, which could be exhausting for an older driver, or just too much to enjoy every day. If you are that kind of buyer though, the GT2 is there for you. Then you've got something like a turbo. The turbo gives you the insane power and straight line performance and all-wheel drive monstrous grip of something like a GT3 or a GT2, but it's more technically advanced, a little heavier, more comfortable, kind of like a Carrera and a GT3 melded together. That's my point. There are so many different variations based on the same underlying platform, really. And another advantage, in my opinion, of the Carrera is it kind of has a purity, speaking again to that platform. This feels kind of like a bare bones 911, but in the best way. I don't mean it doesn't have a decent interior and feels like a kit car. I mean it feels pure. There are no excess wings, intakes, bodywork extensions that it doesn't need to have. It's just a pure 911. And even if you compare this exact car's performance to a modern sports car, it actually holds up remarkably well, and the performance which this car gets from its, for instance, power level is pretty remarkable, actually. Now this particular model, as I said, the Tiptronic with rear-wheel drive, has a 3.6 litre naturally aspirated engine. Of course, it's rear engine, rear-wheel drive, and it's only got 272 horsepower. That's not a lot by today's standards. In fact, there are literally hot hatches nowadays that have more than that. So, does it hold up as a sports car? Well, here's the thing. That 272 horsepower, without even having all-wheel drive, allows the car to hit 60 miles an hour in just over 5 seconds. That is very fast, even by today's standards, and the top speed is up around 170. And it's not like the car is the lightest thing around in order to make up for that modest power, because it's not the lightest thing around. Now, of course, it's not heavy either, certainly lighter than the all-wheel drive models or a turbo, but it weighs under 1,400 kilos. That's a great pivot point once again, because it's light enough to do so much with the power and torque that it's got, but it's not so light that it feels tinny or too loose. Let's be honest, some 911s, and Roofs even more so, the heavily modified from 911 platform performance cars, stuff like TVRs, certain other sports cars as well, they have a reputation for being, well, let's say unruly under certain conditions, difficult or challenging to drive, not forgiving, etc. This car doesn't feel like that at all. In fact, it feels great on the road. The only pointers that I would say in the slightly more negative category for me personally would be that the ride is a little harsher than I expected it to be. But upon thinking about that, it kind of made me think, well, that's like complaining about a running shoe not being as comfortable as a Doc Marten. Well, of course it isn't. Try running 100 meters in Doc Martens and see how you do. It's a sports car. It's not designed to be the most comfortable thing around. It's designed to be comfortable enough while still being fast, and this car definitely is. In fact, there's next to no body roll at all through corners. You feel low enough to be purposeful and a true sports car, but not so low that you feel like you're going to go under the next truck that you come past. It's a perfect mix, in fact. And to speak to the proportions of the car as well, that kind of ties into both a positive and a slight negative for me. The positive thing about the 911, not so much with the latest ones, but certainly this generation, is that by British standards, it's a fairly modestly sized car. It's not overly wide, and the 911 for a long time had that to its advantage. In fact, by general sports car standards, there are lots of much bigger vehicles out there. However, it actually has a relatively high roofline, which means that although the car is physically small and light and fast, it's not obscenely cramped. However, that does tie into my personal slight negative, and that is that, of course, I didn't have the most space in the world sitting in this car, so I would say that if you're over 6 feet tall, you're going to have some issues potentially with headroom. I adjusted the seat as much as it could be. My head was still borderline on the roof, and coupled with the harsher suspension, it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. However, I believe that if you're a couple of inches shorter, it's not going to be an issue at all. In terms of legroom, it was fine, width room was great, and even in terms of visibility, of course back in the day cars used to have much smaller A, B and C pillars, and it gives you fantastic visibility. Now safety, perhaps not so much on some cars, but the advantage in maneuverability and visibility is so apparent as soon as you sit in the car. You can see everything in front of you, and when you're piloting something with so much potential, that's a great advantage to have. I mean, it's pretty simple. Now, another crucial thing about this 911, and you could probably say this about other generations of Carrera as well, is that, as I mentioned earlier on, you can use it every day. And to me, that is one of the things that makes this specific model, not just 911s in general, so good. Because consider what you get. You get a fantastic level of performance from a relatively modest amount of power, and the result of that is that the fuel economy isn't insanely bad, as it could easily be with a sports car. It also has fantastic build quality. You could even say it's over-engineered in some ways, and that's not a bad thing by any stretch. It's a bulletproof car, and you can immediately feel that when you sit in it. It doesn't creak and kind of shimmy around and feel like it's going to snap in half constantly. No, it feels great. It feels German. That's the biggest compliment that I can give it. Then you have the fact that it's not obscenely big for UK roads. That's fantastic. It means that it's not some huge American sports car, as much as I love them, which you feel like you have to breathe in every time you go past, a rock on the side of the road, or a van coming in the opposite direction. And then to top it all off, we have the icing on the cake. This is a sports car which is not only keeping its value, it's increasing in value. In fact, the 993 generation of turbo is worth crazy amounts of money, and if you can find one, so is the GT2. Now this car is still modest for what it is. It's just under 50 grand, which again, that's for a mint condition 1994 classic 911, so of course it's not going to be cheap. But if you are going to get one, I would say now is probably the time, because in future it's going to go up even more, and as more time passes, the fine examples like this one are going to go up even more. That, to me, is a good thing, though, because it means that if you find a great one, it's a sports car that you can enjoy as a sports car, but you can also use every day due to its size, comfort, reliability, and fuel economy, and crucially, you never have to have that nagging thought in the back of your mind about what's the resale value going to be, what am I going to lose on this car. You drive a brand new car off the forecourt, as the saying goes, you lose some money immediately. With this thing, on the other hand, you buy it for just under 50 grand, it's still worth just under 50 grand, and chances are in the future it's going to be worth more than 50 grand. So that to me is a fantastic, as a potential buyer, position to be in. Because for something like a supercar, a true investment, hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions, well, that's all well and good, but it becomes essentially just a piece of art that you have in the garage. You'll rarely use it. All the time that you spend using it devalues it incredibly. Whereas something like this, you can use it. This car has miles on it. It has seen use, and it's still worth that much. So to have all of that investment potential, being a true classic and a highly collectible one in fantastic condition, but that you can actually use and not worry about losing that value, well, that's a pretty privileged place to be. And it's not something which that many sports cars allow you to do. To me, I would say that the 911 is one of them, and this example certainly is. But even if you're not the kind of buyer who cares about resale value, maybe you just want to buy a sports car to use it and enjoy it, well, you've still got all of the other benefits that I mentioned. Now, to speak to one final thing about the car, which you might have noticed, in fact, chances are you did going through this video, it's not a traditional manual. This one is actually a Tiptronic, and some people might not be familiar with what a Tiptronic actually is. To me, for instance, the first thing that comes to mind when I hear Tiptronic is something with flappy paddles, and of course this car doesn't have that. So what is a Tiptronic, and should you even consider one? Because surely an automatic takes away all the fun of a sports car. Well, of course there are some purists who would always want the manual, and that is there if you want it, but this one is a modern solution. At the time it certainly was, and these days it makes more sense than ever. Because the beauty of a Tiptronic, just like the one in my Touareg V10 for instance, is that it allows you to have an auto or a semi-auto, which is in effect a clutchless manual. Now, you don't have paddles, which means that you can still use the shifter stick to give yourself kind of a borderline manual experience. Now, of course, it's not the same, but what you can do with that gearbox is select, for instance, reverse, neutral, drive, sport, as you usually would, but then if you click the shifter over to the right, you have a plus and a minus, wherein you can sequential racing gearbox style, click it forward to change up a gear, and pull it back to change down, giving you, as I said, a clutchless manual experience. So you actually don't lose all of that experience by having a quote-unquote Tiptronic auto, because it's not really a full auto. You still have the option. And even though, of course, you do lose a little bit of performance, acceleration in particular, for instance, the Tiptronic does 0 to 60 in 6 seconds compared to 5 on the manual, the top speed drops a little bit from around 167 to 165, but let's be honest, that ain't exactly slow. 6 seconds from a 270 horsepower car is still great, certainly for a 1994 vehicle, and it makes, for instance, British traffic, depending on where you are in the UK, a whole lot easier. No clutch control, no burnt out clutches, you just put it in drive and go, and then when you get on an open road, click it over to the right, control the gears yourself. I would say that's actually a pretty nice option to have. But either way, if you choose the Tiptronic, if you choose the manual, the rest of the car still remains, as I said in the video, a fantastic deal. It's highly collectible, keeps its value, incredibly well made, very reliable, the fuel is reasonable, the size is perfect for the UK, it has an incredible history, and of course everything since then has added to it, and even in terms of motorsport, the 993 is inherently tied in. In fact, you could say it's one of the most important generations of 911 in terms of Le Mans, because this was the birth of the GT1. So overall, that's it for my thoughts on the 993 Carrera. Doubtless I'll feature some newer and perhaps some older 911s on the channel in future, but of course if you're new to Beards and Cars and new to the channel in general, I would urge you to click through on screen and check out my other reviews, and of course if you're interested in this car or other Porsches, check out the link to Philip Raby down below. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.